overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
Mr. Chairman, I move that the committee favorably report to the House the Select Committee's final report, which includes the committee's legislative recommendations and criminal referrals of Donald J. Trump and others, pursuant to Section 4A of House Resolution 503.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, there are 9 ayes and 0 noes.
The motion is agreed to.
I've been trying to find a better way to save my money.
I don't know what that's coming from. Right now, we got something happening there.
Oh, sorry.
Welcome to the show, folks. It's Chip Franklin with you, and this is What the Franklin, little interruption from the old internet. The question right now is, what do you do with this referral? What does Merrick Garland do with this? What does the U.S. Congress and the President of the United States, how do we move forward from this point? It's a big question. I mean, we're going to talk about taxes in a little bit. We'll talk about Twitter, Elon Musk, what Trump wants. Trump wants to be reinstated. He's mentally ill, obviously. But I mean, there's still an incredible amount of support. I watch Ronnie Jackson's tweets, and it blows my mind. Well, there's a lot to talk about here, and this hour will be pretty much dedicated to that. A little bit later on, we'll be joined by Attorney Ron. In fact, this is an attorney show today. We'll be joined by Ron Filipkowski, who is not only a former U.S. District Attorney, but he's also one of my favorite people on Twitter. Steve Moskowitz will explain to me how we can show the American public a person's tax returns. And I mean, he deserves everything he gets, but I wonder if that's opening a can of worms or a Pandora's box of course. My next guest, though, my first guest actually, is an old friend. Ethan Behrman is not only an attorney, but he's a pretty bright guy, and he goes toe-to-toe every week or so with the Laura Ingrams and the Tucker Carlsons of the world. Ethan, how are you, pal?
Chip, it's good to see you, my friend. What a crazy time, though, to be alive, isn't it?
Well, yeah, yes and no. I think that in some ways it's good to finally see some people get this. I don't know how many friends of yours I had a few people that actually voted for Trump in 2016. I don't know about 20, but I know now when I talk to them about it, they shake their head and they say, it was a nightmare. I mean, there were checkbook voters, I think, and that didn't buy into the insanity. But on the other hand, I mean, we live in a world right now that is just circled by issues, whether it's from Ukraine to North Korea, from the Middle East to downtown Tulsa. So I mean, obviously, there's a lot here to deal with. Let me ask you right out of the bat here. I mean, this referral. I mean, you've been an attorney long enough to know and see that it's kind of like a resolution. It has some meaning, but not real legal stones, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key here. Is it's great politics, and we already knew that the January 6th committee was commenced to the DOJ. We know from other filings that the DOJ has been investigating various aspects related not only to January 6th, but other various issues with the former president himself. So yeah, this is essentially just something that's great politics. It's good for TV. It's good for us to discuss. But in terms of what Merrick Garland's going to do, it has little to no meaning whatsoever.
Do you would Garland file charges directly out of the DOJ, or would it go to a grand jury? Do you know?
Well, in this case, this is outside of your next guest. Ron is going to know this answer better, former U.S. attorney. But I believe, anything criminal is usually going to go through a grand jury first. So, but not necessarily. So I don't know the specific rules in this case. Under Title 18 in the U.S. Code is what everything that was in the referral based in law.
You know, the truth is, I'm one of those people that believes that we shouldn't prosecute Trump because I don't think we win. If we win, we're right where we are right now. If we lose, he appears vindicated, and he could easily, excuse me, he could easily win. Trump could, and that could happen with, you know, either a mistrial. You know, you're telling me you're going to find 12 jurors, and well, maybe you will in Manhattan that'll look at this, you know, clearly. But you know, I mean, you saw that story probably with the guy that killed his wife up in the Bay Area. I forget his name now. And the courts did not allow him a new trial, even though one of the jurors had been beaten by her husband and didn't tell about that during voir dire and got on the jury. The question is, you know, what kind of voir dire would you have to put a jury together to prosecute a former president who, I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of middle ground right now. I mean, you know, I saw a Breitbart poll the other day that said, you know, that Trump was beating Biden. And I laughed, and my wife and I laughed. But I mean, the truth is, there's a big chunk of America that would still vote for this guy straight up. Probably not enough in the states that really matter, obviously. But it's just, you know, it's another reflection of this. If the Republican Party allows him to ascend, there's a lot going on here that we just, you know, I don't know where we go next.
Well, you just brought up a whole litany of issues. Let's start with one of the basics. So you were talking about Scott Peterson.
Yeah.
And typically, if there's a single juror that you know, failed to disclose or lied during voir dire, that's not something that's going to overturn the verdict. So if there was a conspiracy among jurors, that there is precedent where they will an appeals court will overturn a verdict.
Do you think, like, with in that case with Peterson, do you think they interviewed the other jurors and asked them if this person showed a particular bias during their examination of the evidence?
It's possible the judge would have done that.
Yeah.
To investigate what was going on. But again, if it's a single juror, there's almost no precedent, and there might be no precedent for a single juror causing a conviction to be overturned. Again, it's got to be something that's particularly egregious and or a conspiracy, meaning multiple jurors were working together, or just that there were multiple jurors who went off and lied, you know, during voir dire as well. So, you know,
of all these charges, the one that in my head seems the most difficult to prove is the most outrageous, which is the insurrection. You know, and you'll see people say it, rightfully so, from his side.
Yeah.
That he did say go peacefully. We do know from Cassidy Hutchinson and others that apparently he was informed that the people outside those metal detectors were armed. We know the Secret Service was talking about that. So when he was asking people to be allowed to go down there, and when, according to now more than just Cassidy Hutchinson, secondhand from Tony Ornato, we also know that he wanted to go there. Again, though, I don't know. You know, I've never prosecuted a case in my life, and I know that it's, you know, prosecutors really don't like ambiguity. You know. And obviously neither should jurors. You know, the idea that Trump told these people that we have to fight, you know, that, you know, we're going to go up to the Capitol. Is that alone for you? Is that a smoking gun for you when he says we're going to go to the Capitol, walk to the Capitol?
That's not a smoking gun. But what it is you have an entire series of events that led up to January 6th. And I think that's what's so critical here. When you talk about the term insurrection, you know, that's section 2383 of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. And
but wait, how do you know that? Are you just memorized that now?
So, well, I posted about this the other day when the committee was referring, right, when they were talking about it. So no, I don't operate in Title 18 of the U.S. Code. That's not the kind of law I practice. But right. Paying attention to the news, you know, I'm listening to it. But here's the deal: insurrection hasn't been prosecuted since the Civil War, and you know, it's extreme. So, but in this case, you have a series of events. They were plotting and planning this, starting apparently based on the evidence that we've seen so far before the election itself. They were plotting, they were planning, they were going to commit fraud against the United States, which is one of the other charges, right? So we have 371, we have 1001, we have all these, fraud against the United States, to lie, the false slate of electors. We were going to lie about that. We were going to lie about the results of the election. We knew that there was nothing wrong with the voting machines. That was Bill Barr's famous, BS statement about problems with the voting machines. So it's not that there's a single smoking gun, and most prosecutions don't depend on a single smoking gun, nor do I in civil law. When I'm representing a plaintiff or a defendant, there aren't, single pieces. It's a series of events that lead to it. And I think it's actually fairly strong, but it's an area of law that doesn't get prosecuted. So we really don't have a good measure.
This is a tweet that Green put out a couple days ago. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, refused to have the National Guard at the Capitol, and it was easily breached by non. Obviously, she can't summon the National Guard there. Only a governor can in the state, and in the District of Columbia, that would mean the President of the United States.
That's correct.
The federal property. And then Larry Hogan, of course, who was a governor of Maryland, it was right down the road. For people that don't know the proximity of Maryland, it's essentially 6 miles from the White House to the border of Maryland. And Hogan was waiting. And Hogan is a governor of Maryland who is a Republican and not a progressive Republican, but nonetheless was a guy that said, I called, and, as you know, Secretary of Defense Espers had been replaced in the weeks leading up to that, which scared the hell out of me because and then there are reports that people were worried about sending the National Guard there, that Trump would take control of them and then tell them to go in and stop the proceedings. And then you got your coup. But I guess, we did come dangerously close. We saw, again, Nancy Pelosi is tougher, sleeping 8 hours a night than Trump ever will be. That woman is amazing. I mean, I think when we look back on Nancy Pelosi's tenure as Speaker of the House, it's going to be unparalleled. And even moving forward, through a tremendous time, through an attempted overthrow of our democratic process, she just was knocking. Who else I think in that is Liz Cheney. And I right. I would never,
You did this, she said to Jim Jordan. She said on the floor, as he's trying to usher her out, as the Capitol is being invaded by the mob, Jim Jordan grabs her and she says, "Get your hands off me. You effing did this."
Whoa.
And she confirmed that she said that. So that's what I'm saying. You have evidence here of a large conspiracy. We know, based on John Eastman, Roger Stone, Steve Bannon, all these different people, Mike General Flynn, who pled the fifth over, hey, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States? This was Trump's guy, right? And no, I plead the fifth. That's unbelievable. Now, as an attorney, of course, I always, of course, you have the right to plead the fifth, but in that context, it's shocking.
Yeah, and I guess, we're looking at the law, we're looking at public opinion, we're looking at a former president who failed in every way, was impeached twice, and continues to this day deny the election results. And that, to me,
Google would be proud.
Yeah.
Seriously, this level of lying and use of propaganda in the media, which, let's be blunt, Chip, the right-wing media, first off, AM radio is almost exclusively right-wing, or it's sports betting now, apparently.
He's referring to our old station. Ethan used to have a show on KGO, as I did for 8 years. And
I had a show thanks to you, Chip. But the point is we have we've removed gatekeepers, right? And so anybody has access, and the right has very intelligently and effectively spent their money to get messages out that are false or are so badly skewed without ever representing the facts on the ground. Look what happened with the COVID. That's a joke that we had over 1 million Americans died. I saw a report that over 200,000 of them were preventable. But
and of course, you go back now and you look at, I showed a tweet from Marjorie Taylor Greene, but there are a lot of Republicans that tweet out. See, this was the whole problem with Twitter. It wasn't about misinformation. It was disinformation. It was information that had a target at the truth. It wasn't just a mistake. And I think that's the thing, though, about numbers and the law. You know, to me, that we have an opportunity right now. And I just don't know whether or not the smartest thing in the world is to indict this former president. And I wonder if there is a win in there for
So
this country.
I want to make one last comment for you, Chip, on this topic, which is accountability. You know, one of the problems that we have had in our government, and why people in 2016 had arguments for Donald Trump, is you look at corruption. It is deeply corrosive in our government. And when we don't hold our elected and appointed officials accountable for their actions, that makes it easier for the next person to justify their own illegal action.
But we never had to worry about that, Ethan. I mean, you know, that's the thing. We never had to worry about somebody in that position compromising the entire country for their
Right,
own.
we didn't. That's why we didn't necessarily have laws specifically directed at it before.
I know you're heading out here. You're heading to England. Have a great holiday. Happy Hanukkah. And we'll catch you soon, my friend.
All right. Happy holidays, Chip. Thanks so much, man.
See you, pal. Ethan Behrman, attorney, old friend, and also great talk show host. All right. So one of the more surprising things that's just happened is the idea that President Trump's taxes will be seen now by everyone. Listen to this.
Well, the breaking news tonight, as you just heard, is that we are all going to see Donald Trump's tax returns, finally, as promised. 3 years ago on this program, House Ways and Means Chairman Richard Neal had asked to obtain Donald Trump's tax returns, and we told you then that Richard Neal would succeed. He would obtain Donald Trump's tax returns from 2015 to 2020. Chairman Neal has obtained them, and he's going to make them public by the end of this week.
Part of our proposal as well is to require, through this legislation that I have filed, that the IRS within 90 days of a president taking the oath, with cooperation from the Secretary of the Treasury, the mandatory audit would in fact have to take place, and the president would be required to submit the documents for that review. I think that it's fair to say that there's going to be broad support for this, I believe, in the House and the Senate. This takes care of ending any potential confusion or chicanery as it relates to the audit program. The IRS then would be required to publish the tax forms. Okay. We're joined right now by not only a sponsor of the show, but the smartest guy I know when it comes to taxes, Steve Moskowitz. Steve, I love the word chicanery because I think that it seems the last 6 years we've been hearing about releasing tax forms. When you show the world your tax forms, it's essentially a diary, right? I mean, everything you've done in some way is seen in those numbers. But I don't understand this. I thought that they were secret, and that I understand House Ways and Means can see them, but is this unprecedented that we're going to show a private, well, not just a U.S. citizen's tax returns to the public?
First, regardless of what anybody's politics is or how you feel about former President Trump, love him, hate him, I am outraged and vehemently opposed to this tax return stunt.
Right.
And here's the deal. People complain bitterly, oh, you don't have any good politicians running. Then you go ahead and say, parade your tax returns. To me, tax returns are very private, like your medical records. That's none of anybody's business. And extra outrage, why are his returns being shown to everybody in the world? What possible purpose is that? You know, if he violated the law, that's between President Trump and the IRS and the judge and the lawyers that deal with that. But tax returns are supposed to be sacred. It's a big deal. And other than trying to embarrass him, what possible purpose do you show everybody in the country his return? Come on.
I'm glad you said this, because when I first heard this, I thought you and I had this conversation before in the past, and we've spoken many times about this. And the idea that that, and your point, and I hadn't thought of, which is really important. You know, this right here is a great way to tell really talented people who want to serve this country, stay away. because every possible thing that you have, we can run up the flagpole, dirty laundry and everything. I mean, and again, taxes can be, for example, somebody can go through your taxes and say, well, you didn't give to charity. Right.
Or maybe you didn't deduct it. For example, that's common. People don't bother to deduct it. And another thing that's very troubling, tax returns may show you some things, but in an audit, it's all the support for it. For example, what do people expect to find? Other income, bribe from Vladimir Putin? I mean, come on.
He's not going to put money he got, ill-gotten booty. He's not going to, if he's taking money from a foreign power, he's not going to declare it.
Well, that's one of the things I would say. The other thing I would say is look at the situation in New York where the big allegation is what's on the tax returns is wrong. That's a common allegation that, you didn't report all your income or you deducted something, just like his allegations in New York. Furthermore,
can I jump in there, Steve? Because one of the things about New York is that for some of his buildings, he would give the insurance companies a certain value and then give the IRS a different value. And of course, doing that and falsifying those forms is a federal crime. And that's one of the things.
Well, when you talk about falsifying, be real careful here, Chip, because lots of times clients give different financials to the bank than they do the IRS. Oh my God, they're cheating the bank, they're cheating the IRS. There's a different set of rules between your taxes and accounting. Accounting is governed by GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, whereas the tax returns are governed by the Internal Revenue Code. Something simple like depreciation. You may take depreciation on your tax return that's very different than accounting. So you could show the bank a financial statement that said you were making a big profit and a tax return that said you're making a big loss. And somebody says, aha, look, they're different. We got you. Well, wait a minute. There's a different set of rules. GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles for the financial statement, the tax returns. So if you're going to do that, then you say, well, all right, you can have a reconciliation between them, but they're different rules. And then again, with an audit, it's all the support. Suppose you put down charity, $1 million. Well, in an audit, the auditor would say, okay, show me the proof. The proof is not attached to a tax return. So basically a tax return, you say, here's my numbers. And if the IRS wants to check it, they can check it. And then, and also other dangerous precedents. What about, especially, President, what about if you say, well, look, besides your tax returns, we want to see all your medical reports for the past 10 years. And then let's go further. How about we're going to have,
you can make a case of that because he's the president of the United States. We want to see, we want to at least hear from your physician that you're okay moving forward.
But how? Okay, so then what you do is you encourage somebody not to go to the doctor. And if he went to the doctor, whatever condition he had would be controlled, and he's perfectly okay. But because he doesn't want that revealed, he doesn't go to the doctor, and then he drops over in office.
Yeah.
Or how far do you want to take it? Surgeon General, maybe you have to pass a physical examination for the job. Come on.
Well, and also, look, and I'm the last person to defend Trump, and I'm not defending Trump.
I remember listening to your show, the honorarium you provided every day on former President Trump.
But I have to be a contrarian, and I didn't know you would agree with me on this, but I had a feeling from our talks that, number one, he hasn't been charged with a crime yet. He's been impeached twice, but not for taxes, right? And everybody wants to see his taxes, and I understand that. House Ways and Means has seen the taxes, right? The Department of Justice has seen the taxes. The question is, if they can force Trump to put his taxes in front of the world when he hasn't been charged with a crime yet, and even if he had been, but let's just suppose, then why can't they do that to anyone? I mean, why can't they just pick any Joe and say, we want to show the world your taxes?
This is where it starts, the old slippery slope. And again, what possible purpose is there to show everybody in the country his tax returns, except political, to try to embarrass them? Come on. And again, even if you were charged with a crime, you're presumed innocent unless you're found guilty by a jury and of your peers. So the bottom line is, to me, I think this is all political, and it does nothing but harm. What good is this investigation going to do any of us? He's out of office. What good is there? If he did something wrong on his tax returns, then like any other person, let him deal with the IRS, and the IRS can decide if he's right or wrong or he should be criminally charged. I'm fine with that. But this parading his returns, I mean, is this a banana republic that the new guy
I totally agree.
shoots
And
the old guy?
and I'm as bad as liberal as they get. But this is to me not the way to do this. This is not. We have look. We have the guy standing in front of the White House and Capitol, calling for people to storm the Capitol. I mean, bringing his tax returns and parading them again. This is, in my opinion, if there's charge him, and then you can tell people what was found in the taxes. But I don't know. Will we actually? I mean, are they going to be like in the newspaper? I mean, and will people even be able to understand what they're looking at, Steve?
Well, that's the other problem. Is when you look at it, if you know what you're doing with the tax.
By the way, did I just show how old I am? Newspaper. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
Look, you can talk about ancient Rome 3,000 years ago. It doesn't mean you were there.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, we both know Washington was the first president. I wasn't doing tax returns at the time, and you weren't broadcasting on the tin can.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, anybody that knows anything about tax returns know you need all the support, because the tax return is a summarization. So if you see something like gross revenue, well, number one, you don't know, did he report all his gross revenue? Like in an IRS audit, the first thing the auditor says, well, show me all your bank statements. And then they add them up and say, well, wait a minute, if your deposits are more than what's on your tax return, do you have unreported income? And oftentimes the simple answer is no, I borrowed some money or transferred money from account A to account B. That's how you do it. Or you look at a receipt and then you say, well, okay, what's the purpose of what you bought here? It's like going on a trip. Was it a business trip? Was it a vacation? Business trip's deductible, vacation's not. Was it a part vacation, part business trip? So the bottom line is, if the IRS was looking at the returns, just the naked returns, they would need way more information to see, are they correct or not? Not to mention they do an investigation like of the banks. Did he have deposits? Not to mention other things are lifestyle, where if you're living in a mansion and driving a Ferrari and you report $8,000 of income, they're going to ask you, well, how'd you do that? And there could be an answer like you inherited $1 billion, and that's not on your tax return because it's not required to be.
Yeah,
So
I remember
again,
that. Go ahead.
Again, to me, this is all political. This is part of the hatred forum. And the problem is, I believe this is going to hurt each and every one of us, because now you have another privacy eroded. And then where does it stop? John Smith has been accused of something, so let's show his tax returns to the world.
My gut is that President Obama would have opposed this. I remember him talking about this issue when somebody asked him about Snowden, who had fled to Russia after revealing secrets, and he was a staunch supporter of privacy. So again, I guess we'll have to see moving forward. Steve, thank you so much. Great.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Chip.
Hi, buddy. Again, that's Steve Moskowitz, my friend, and also helps us sponsor this show at moskowitzllp.com. I'll just tell you this, that everything he said is true. And where we are right now is, in fact, at a slippery slope. We all want Trump. Nobody wants Trump more than I do. I've been on the air for 6 years talking about this guy and watching what he does and his cabal say about this country and the good people that serve it. That said, if you look at this, and this is a good question that John has. He says, when you hold office, there is no expectation of privacy? Yes, there is, John. You are still a citizen of the United States, and you still have a right to privacy. Some privacy, not obviously. This was what we saw earlier this week, and I look at this and I ask myself, moving forward, all right, again, what do we do with all this information? Is it better to move forward like it seems we are now? But what's that old saying? If you're going to go after the king, you better go all the way.
This committee is nearing the end of its work. But as the country, we remain in strange and uncharted waters. We've never had a president of the United States stir up a violent attempt to block the transfer of power.
No man who would behave that way at that moment in time can ever serve in any position of authority in our nation again. He is unfit for any office.
The committee found that Mr. Trump raised hundreds of millions of dollars with false representations made to his online donors. The proceeds from his fundraising, we have learned, have been used in ways that we believe are concerning. In particular, the committee has learned that some of those funds were used to hire lawyers. We've also obtained evidence of efforts to provide or offer employment to witnesses.
So there we are right now. Joining me right now is attorney Ron Filipkowski. He's also a Marine historian, a former federal prosecutor and a Republican, now a defense attorney and a Democrat, and nice enough to join us here. Ron, thanks for the last minute jumping in. I appreciate it. Sure. We just had a conversation about taxes with a friend of mine who is a tax attorney, and he agrees with me that showing the United States the president's taxes is unnecessary, and it goes into areas that I don't believe we should be in right now. We have enough on this guy. What are your thoughts just on that in general?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's a little bit of a distraction, unless you're going to indict him for tax fraud or something, which seems like there might be some evidence of that. But,
no. There's a litany of stuff to charge this guy with. Right, yeah. Let me ask you that. They're just right off my thoughts are that, despite stuff like this, where he comes out and puts this stuff out there. I think I got this off your Twitter. The so-called deep state, often referred by as many other names, cheaters, insurrectionists, communists, and he continues to move on this and attack. And I think, if you're and you know this, and I grew up in D.C. My mom worked for Justice for 30 years. My dad was Capitol Hill Police. I grew up around the bureaucracy in Washington, and unlike the Reagan characterization of it, I found them to be dedicated people. Yeah, some of them worked because it was a job for life, as advertised in the 60s and 70s, right? But they really cared. When I hear people attack the quote unquote deep state, it's my family. I know these people. They really cared, and so that bothers me. But I also know this guy. I've watched him my entire adult life. If we go after him, we better convict him, because if we don't, he comes out stronger. Would you agree?
Yes. And I think there's one person that's the key to that. When you look at this, and I've defended people in big conspiracy cases and prosecuted cases as well like this, not like this, but conspiracy cases. They're like a spoke. The way to think about it is like it's a wheel with spokes. And there's many different people involved in this conspiracy, from political actors to lawyers to operatives, you name it. People inside the White House, people outside the White House. What you want as a prosecutor is you want to find the person in the conspiracy who can, number one, get your target for you, and who has information that can implicate almost everybody else in the conspiracy. And you also have to make sure that that person has the kind of character like he's Billy Zane in Titanic. He's willing to push the lady out of the way to get the last seat in the lifeboat. That person, there's just one person that just jumps off the screen who is the obvious choice for Jack Smith to flip here, and that's Mark Meadows. Yeah. Mark Meadows can get Trump. He can get everybody else. He has no character. He is not somebody who's going to be willing to go to prison for Donald Trump. So I think how we're going to see this play out is Jack Smith's going to gather his evidence. Probably in March, he's going to meet with Meadows' attorneys. He's going to not show him everything he has, but he's going to show him a few things and say, look, we got your guy. And they got Meadows. He's either
what do they have Meadows on? Conspiracy?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, he was the point man for everybody. Not so. An example is, I mean, he's communicating with the members of Congress. He's communicating with some of the real nut jobs that are out there. He's communicating with, the people that are coming in and out of the White House counsel, people at DOJ. He's the point man here. He's the gatekeeper. And he was, and when Trump kind of walled himself off on January 6th from everybody else, Meadows was the only one who was able to get in and talk to him while this stuff was going on. So he is definitely the linchpin. So I think if they can get Meadows to cooperate against Trump, everything falls into place.
You know, I look back at if there's a smoking gun in these 4 different cases against him, New York, the documents, January 6th in Georgia, I look at his comments to Raffensperger about, give me the votes, right? To me, that's a smoking gun. And I wonder, going back to Esper's leaving, and I really worried when that happened, because the guy they put in, his name escapes me right now. But
Chris Miller.
Thank you, Miller,
Yeah.
really was not ready for that position. And it really worried me. And there were people that said this, and I've never really seen anybody in a position of authority say it's true, but there was a fear that if Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, had sent the National Guard in, they respond to the president of the United States. If the president of the United States told them to secure the Capitol, they would have had to do it, right?
Absolutely. That's a really good, insightful point that you make. Esper, one of the first things Donald Trump did immediately after the election, days after, was fire Mark Esper. And Esper warned at the time. He said, Donald Trump is going to put somebody in this position who is not going to say no to him, like I did. Occasionally, Mark Esper said no. And that person was Chris Miller, and that person was the person who would be responsible for mobilizing the Guard and sending the Guard in. I've heard some Chris Miller interviews and podcasts, and his answers about the time gap, the delay, are not satisfactory. He's very evasive. I don't know what he told the committee. I don't know what he would tell a grand jury, but yeah, I mean, 2 things. He replaced Mark Esper with Chris Miller, who's just a nobody. And then he also, Bill Barr quit.
Yeah.
People forget that. I mean, why did Bill Barr quit with a month to go? I believe Bill Barr absolutely knew what was going to happen. He saw this coming. He had all the information. He knew what was going to happen on January 6th and wanted to be nowhere around it, and got out of Dodge. So those two changes were key.
Say Hutchinson's recanting of Ornato's comments about Trump trying to grab the wheel and go to the Capitol. If he had been successful going to the Capitol, what do you imagine might have happened?
Whew. Right. That is a really good, you're asking some good questions here today, Chip.
I try to picture that in my mind. Like, so he would go probably, on the way to the Capitol, for people that don't know, I would imagine he would have gone and probably come in, if people think he's going to drive right up to the front, he wouldn't. He would probably drive to the side, right. To the north side, I think, and from 4th Street and come down that way. And then, so he gets there, and if he goes into the Capitol, that's not against the law. Obviously, he's the president of the United States. But I mean, I was just trying to picture that whole scenario in my head. I mean, the thing of all of this in my mind, the one thing that sticks out, and I don't know if it's true, but I've heard from various sources, that Pence was afraid to get in a car with Secret Service agents he did not recognize. That's right out of a movie, right, Ron?
Yeah, he didn't recognize the driver. That was it. Yeah. Sure. I mean, his instincts were probably correct. What was Trump going to do there? I mean, was he going to lead them marching in there? And I had heard one account that his plan was actually to walk onto the floor of Congress as it was happening. But of course, would the forced entry have happened? But the thing is, I think people were starting to break into the Capitol very shortly after his speech. It wasn't very long. So in theory, if he actually had gone, some of the violent stuff would have already been happening when he arrived. So, yeah, I mean, would he have quelled the crowd? I mean, it's too hard to say. I mean, the whole idea was just insane.
So I bring this up because there's 2 questions. The first question is, if in fact, DOJ takes this referral, and I'm still a little unclear as to how much cooperation there was between the committee and Department of Justice along the way. When they got the information, did they get the same day? All that, did they share it? But if Garland decides that the preponderance of evidence is just too great that an indictment has to happen, will it go to a grand jury, or can the Department of Justice indict without a grand jury?
No, it has to be a grand jury.
Okay.
Yeah, and I expect that to happen in June. Is my time frame. See, the politics do come into play here, and I think that Jack Smith and Merrick Garland are not going to want to go much past the summer, because then, I mean, the primary is well underway in the fall, and I don't think that they want to indict Trump when he's basically already secured the nomination. I think that they have a little bit of an eye towards being fair to the Republican Party. Fair meaning like, hey, we're going to indict this guy early enough that if you choose, you can replace him with a different nominee. Now, if you choose to plow forward and nominate somebody who's under indictment, then that's your choice. But we're gonna let you make that decision with an early enough indictment. So, in other words, if an indictment came in like March of 2024, that would be unfair, really.
Sure.
To
But can
everybody.
what the optics of this? Would he surrender? They wouldn't perp walk him, obviously. He would be allowed to surrender. He would come in, probably released on recognizance, right?
Yeah. Well, not so sure about that now, because of the nature of these charges. I mean, that seditious conspiracy charge. I mean, there's a presumption that you're a flight risk, that there's no. I wouldn't necessarily assume. I mean, just because we've seen people like Bannon and stuff get out of jail, but those are petty contempt charges.
Right. Yeah. No.
You know, I'm not so sure he would get out on pretrial release, probably, but it's not a given, you know. But the other question is, you know, are they going to indict everybody at once, or are they going to do it in a piecemeal way and sort of work their way up? My guess would be that they're going to indict everybody in one shot with one grand jury.
So Mark Meadows theoretically would get some kind of immunity for his testimony if, in fact, he rolls against the former president, right?
Yeah, he won't get nothing, but he might have a chance to get, you know, probation, slap on the wrist. In other words, I don't think he's going to be like Alan Weisselberg in the New York case, where he's going to take the bullet for Trump. And, you know, Weisselberg just basically said, I did all this stuff on my own. Trump didn't know what I was doing, which is preposterous, but he stuck to that story, which is probably the main reason why Trump wasn't prosecuted criminally in New York. I just don't think that, you know, Weisselberg was with Trump for what, 20 years? He was his guy. Trump doesn't have that kind of relationship with Meadows. Meadows is only loyal until it doesn't benefit Meadows to be loyal anymore. You know?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because Michael Cohen loves to talk about how Trump mastered the art of mob speak. You know, he won't say, you know, go get that guy. He'll say, you know, something has to be done about that guy, you know, and leave that up to you, right? And you know, it's from people who have their whole life assumed everybody was wired, you know, and anything they say could be evidence against them. So they spoke in a manner that would not betray, you know, their guilt or innocence. But I just can't. I'm trying to wrap my head around, you know, and I say we, the American public, and those who are. I'm a progressive, not always, not my whole life, but I am now, and I think to myself, moving forward, is this all positive by taking this guy and indicting him? I mean, isn't there something the federal government can do, like this equivalent of a censor, you know, in the Congress? Could they come out and say that we have all the evidence? We're not going to. I mean, to me, if we indict him and then we go there again, it's like I said to start this off, we better win, because if he's found not guilty or there's a hung trial, doesn't that empower him and all the crazies that, you know, that we see that stormed the Capitol that day, the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, even the Josh Hawleys and Ghosters of the world?
Well, I mean, we had that deal that you're talking about on the table in February of 21, which was, you know, the impeachment, the 14th Amendment. I think that, you know, had Republicans impeached him and convicted Trump and made him ineligible to run, I think that would have gone a long way toward maybe us not having this criminal prosecution.
Can't we use the 14th Amendment against him now? I mean,
you know? Yeah, they could, but, you know, the ship has sailed. There were talks. I know there was negotiations back then to where Republicans said, well, we'll agree that he's not eligible to run again. We'll vote for that, but we won't vote for impeachment. That kind of a deal was being tossed around, but, you know, there was no consensus on that. I mean, the Republicans just didn't want to compromise, didn't want to cooperate. Trump wouldn't let them do that. And so now it's an all or nothing deal.
So his announcement to run, obviously, it came at an odd time, so close to even more peril for him and the Republican Party with the midterms and all. After the midterms, expecting big victory, and he kind of was forced into announcing that he was going to run. In the money, somebody brought this up to me the other day. These $99 NFTs. You were only allowed to buy enough that you stayed under the $10,000 minimum. So the grift just never ends, obviously. And I guess the argument for not prosecuting him is that either way, he's going to continue to do what he does until his heart stops beating, and which is, try to rile up the uneducated, as he loves to say, people that essentially watch one news program. And, I think to myself, this sounds crazy, but a lot of this comes down to Hannity, to Ingram, to Tucker Carlson, to Fox, not OAN, not Newsmax, but talking 50, 60 million people a week watch this show. That's a significant number. So I think moving forward, you can make the case that we have to indict him simply because he'll just keep doing what he's doing.
And for the Republican Party, there's only one way out of this, which is what some of the names you just mentioned. And that is, I believe they've got to find a way to nominate somebody else, because Trump has already said, even if he's indicted, he is not dropping out of the race. He has already said that, okay, yeah. Which is insane. But what needs to happen is, what I believe is, if he is indicted, I think that there needs to be an intervention at that point where people like Hannity, like the people that he listens to, Tucker Carlson, some of the bigger donors, go down there and have a sit down with him and just say, look, you need to focus on staying out of prison. You need to focus on your court case. We'll support you in that. We'll help you with that. Ronna McDaniel or whoever is the RNC chief as well. And
but Ron, he's tweeting today that it's all still a lie and everything.
Yeah,
there is no Goldwater in the Republican Party like with Nixon, right? That goes scout Pennsylvania
That's
Avenue.
The question. Is there a group of people that can go to him and convince him to drop out? And I don't know the answer to that, but I don't know if those people would even have the guts to do it.
Well, yeah, I'm not a psychologist, but there's dozens that say he has all these sociopathic tendencies, and for those that it's not psychopathic, but a sociopath is a person that's unable to get out of his own way. He's just, I can't believe we're having this conversation, to be honest with you. Right. As a prosecutor, I remember when I was in Baltimore, I was there for 9 years, and they had to move cases out of the city because jury nullification. The people in the city did not trust the law enforcement, understandably, the Freddie Gray case and many others. And so they just didn't believe anything. It's like I'm sure you were like a lot of white people, as I was, when black people applauded when OJ was found not guilty. They'd lived their whole life with this idea, and in many cases, obviously not just an idea, but a reality. And I look at the people that support this president, and I think in some ways, Democrats like myself are to blame. We are condescending in many ways. I used to do that as a joke, Ron. When I did stand up, I'd say to the audience, I go, the guy was condescending. You know what condescending means? And there's an aspect of this that is, that's who we are. The Anthony Wieners of the world, right? That believe they're so emboldened and so, so full of themselves that they do these things. And you can actually, and it's not really difficult, put the dots together. The Anthony Weiner is the reason why Donald Trump is president, because, his wife was working for Hillary Clinton. And then when his laptop had communication and emails on it, and Comey came out and did that last minute announcement. And, that might've been enough for, Michigan and Pennsylvania and other Ohio. I guess just what I'm trying to say is that, we're at a crossroads here, and I don't know what we should do. If you were Merrick Garland, what would your feelings be? Because you've been a federal prosecutor. If you were in his shoes, would you prosecute this guy?
I think constitutionally he doesn't want to. I don't mean the Constitution, the document. I mean internally. Yeah. I think it's in his DNA to want to avoid political interference with a presidential election. I also think that's why Trump has declared earlier than any presidential candidate in history, specifically because he senses that about Garland, and he understands that that makes it harder for Garland to do this when he is a presidential candidate versus just a retired president. So I think that's what he's doing. I mean, I don't think Garland wants to do it, but I think Garland has to do it. I just think at this point, that's where the evidence has led him to. I don't think he would have brought in someone like Jack Smith with Jack Smith's reputation if that wasn't the intention.
So we have a minimum of, I mean, if they indict sometime in the summer, when are we looking at a trial? Another year?
Yeah, and by the way, I should mention, remember they moved the OJ trial too. It should have been in Santa Monica and was moved to Central Los Angeles for the jury pool, by the way. But yeah, I think my prediction is time frame indictment June. Trial would be fall of 24. And I think the crazy thing would be, I mean, is he still running at that point? Has he dropped out? I mean, it just seems to me utter insanity.
Right? You're just saying that
to be
in my head.
for president and going to trial on a conspiracy case.
What method would you use in voir dire to try to find people who were, Trump supporters that would not change their mind? How would you do that? That'd be hard, right?
By the way, I mean, presumably the jury would be in DC, and that's been a big bone of contention with the Republicans about all the January 6th prosecutions, because they have been in DC, and they point to the fact that DC is whatever it is, 90% Democrat, a significant African-American population. And so they point
maybe just a little pissed that they have no representation in Congress, possibly.
That too.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And so they are saying that they can't get a fair trial in DC. So I certainly would expect Trump to try and move the trial. I don't know if that would be successful or not. Probably not. But yeah, Vardar.
Last question. So
it would be so difficult.
They could theoretically indict him for political purposes and then cut a deal that had no prison time and that he just can't run for office. Could you put that stipulation in there in a deal that you can't run for federal office again?
Absolutely. Yep.
Maybe that's the way out of it.
That could happen. Yeah.
It's going to be a soap opera, man. I can't, when 2016, when he came down that elevator that summer, who knew? Right. And here we still go. Hey man, I really love your Twitter handle and the stuff you post up there. You post is just really brilliant stuff, Ron. Thank you so much again for your time. You have a wonderful holiday and the best of yours. Okay.
Do the same.
Thanks, buddy.
Bye.
Again, that's Ron Filipkowski. Just again, I'm really fortunate to have these really smart people to come on and talk about this. I appreciate you guys. I really haven't read any of your comments today. And I know that. Here we go. All right. So you look at this. I am. There we go. I like this one. You sound really weak, Chip. I don't know what you mean, Alan. What do you mean I'm weak? Yeah, you do understand? I assume you're referring to the possibility of not prosecuting Trump. I don't want any violence done, and it'll happen to people. It won't happen to me. But it'll happen to people my son's age who'll be on the streets. Again, they're living this life of listening to this, the anti-Semitic racist blather coming from people like Nick Fuentes and others, who are out there and are saying these things and putting people of color, Jews, Muslims, essentially minorities, people that aren't white, in harm's way. I mean, this is a big part of what Trump is. We didn't even mention it in the last 45 minutes, but that's what we're dealing with. I see stuff like this and I get it. It'd be great, but the truth is it's not simply Trump. Again, when you try to look at what's happening, Nick makes a point about, it's not what Trump actually says. He is a master of this mob talk. We're not going to have Remember the P tape everybody wanted to see so bad, right? There is no P tape here. This president is really, this former president he's good at what he does. And that's being a grifter. He is a real grifter. And, you may want to see him in prison, and I get that. But then we I got to deal with stuff like this. And this is, the kind of conspiracy stuff. There's no secret deal, Donald. There's not. I'm not gonna pretend I know more than you guys, but I did grow up. My mother worked for the U.S. District Attorney's Office for 30 years. My dad talked about all this stuff all the time. And I grew up in D.C. I worked on the Hill. These are, for the most part, these are good people that work in government. I think, again, I've said this before many times, and I'm a big fan of Michael Lewis, the author Michael Lewis. And he wrote a book called The Fifth Risk, which you could probably get in paperback on an Amazon for $2 or something. Buy the book. It's still relevant, what Trump would want to do. We all laugh and say there's no way Trump could be reelected president again. But I remember saying that in the summer of 2016. There's no way this could happen. I remember when the Grab Her by the Pussy tape came out, thinking to myself, well, there's just, there's no way he can run now. What's the Republican Party going to do now? The MAGA crowd, they may be deficient, but it doesn't mean that they aren't committed. You're talking 50, 60 million Americans. Granted, there's 330 or 40 million in this country, but we do find ourselves in that position. I watch these hearings, and I really sense, when I see when Trump sends out stuff like this, the so-called deep state, the cheaters, the insurrectionists, the communists, and even the good old rhinos have been working on sinister and evil plots for a long, long time, even well before I came to office. This is what they want to play on. This is what they're after. This is our country right now, divided by people who believe that there's a cabal of elected officials who are doing everything they can to keep us away from the truth. When the real truth is that, none of this is easy, that it's a freaking miracle this country's lasted this long. I don't know, I got another. I want to play you one more thing from the hearings that I liked. And Jamie Raskin, whose son passed, I believe earlier this year to suicide, and who was part of the committee, he had some comments. Listen to a little bit of this, please.
Title 18, Section 1512C, which makes it unlawful for anyone to corruptly obstruct, influence, or impede any official proceeding of the United States government. We believe that the evidence described by my colleagues today and assembled throughout our hearings warrants a criminal referral of former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violations of this statute. We believe that there is more than sufficient evidence to refer former President Donald J. Trump, John Eastman, and others for violating Title 18, Section 371. This statute makes it a crime to conspire to defraud the United States.
All right, joining me right now. Oh, we lost him. I thought we had Mark Thompson. We had him just a second ago. I guess he's running off to do his show. His show kicks off at the top of the hour on YouTube. Just put Mark Thompson Show. It's a great show. I really enjoy his banter. I'm sorry I missed him. Again, I appreciate all your comments, and I do read them all, and I will comment to you after the show as we get through this. We talked about tax returns, and I think that there is a there's a real truth that's beneath all of this, and that is that it's hard making this country. It is hard. Yes. But they're not required to, Kyle, to show their tax returns. Yes, it is. Democracy's hard. Freedom is hard. Dictatorship's easy. This is hard. So moving forward, I guess, I don't know. As we come up on the holidays here, we got 2 more shows. This show is, and next year is I'm going to cut it down to 2 days a week. But I will get more and more of my videos out, and I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the show. You can email me at chip@chipfranklin.com and be part of our mailing list, and continue to come back here. We do appreciate it. Stay tuned for the Mark Thompson Show from 10 to 12, then Nikki Medora from 12 to 2. And if I don't see you before, Christmas or right now during Hanukkah, have a great holiday and be safe. And we're in this together, right? Damn right.
I can handle things on the spine.
We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the fuck is wrong with you?